Hello everybody, as you know my name is Jaye, and today I'm going to be talking to you guys about aquaponics. So aquaponics are the combination of two growing techniques. First, hydroponics there on the left. This is soilless growing, where the water is focused through the plant media. It's much more efficient than traditional agriculture because we use the same water to water the plants multiple times. And in traditional agriculture, a lot of the water is lost due to drainage, which is not present in this system. Additionally, this water is given all the required nutrients that the plants need, which speeds up the growing process. Since it is soilless, it allows us to work vertically without the constraints of the ground, which presents many advantages. The second technique is aquaculture, which is exactly what it sounds like, agriculture in the water or fish farming. So when combined, these two techniques display a lot of advantages. First, fish produce ammonia through their waste. This is toxic to the fish. Originally, if I were going to grow fish either for consumption or as pets, I would need to purchase a filter. What this filter does is that it gives a place for algae to grow. The algae consumes this ammonia, turns it into nitrite, and then turns that nitrite into nitrate, which is vital for fish health, and they need it to live. With this system, there's no need to purchase a filter, as these plants serve as a natural filter, making this conversion entirely themselves. And additionally, the nutrients that it filters out from the fish waste provides added nutrients, also speeding up the plant growth. The second advantage it displays is soilless growing, just as hydroponics do, again, allowing us to work vertically or leave the constraints of our horizontal growing method. And lastly, it is much more water efficient. And it is much more water efficient at growing a certain amount of plants. But what you must keep in mind when thinking about this is, let's say it uses less water to grow 10 ears of corn compared to traditional agriculture. In addition to this corn, we're also getting the added biomass output of fish. So to compare that to traditional agriculture, if you wanted this biomass output, in addition, you would need to grow livestock, which not only require their own hydration, but a lot of hydration for the grazing lands and grass that they need. So learning about the advantages of aquaponics led me to look into their applicability, and that's what ultimately led me to the problem with our current agricultural model. The first problem I identified was our use of water. Right now, 70% of our water use goes to agriculture. And while this may not inherently seem bad on its own, it's easy to assume that many of our water-related issues that involve the scarcity of water are attributable to this inefficient use, as it is over 2/3 of our water consumption. High consumption rates in certain countries can lead to things like waterborne disease and economic inconsistency for countries that don't have consistent supply of water. The second problem I identified was our use of land. This can lead to things like deforestation. Currently, 40% of our inhabitable land is used for agriculture, and ultimately, if we're going to have a system that fits the needs of our growing population, we're going to need to readdress how we are using this land. And the last problem I identified was monocropping. Monocropping is the growth of a single crop year after year in the same crop field as opposed to crop rotation. This can lead to desertification, which is basically the process of soil becoming unable to healthily house these plants. Other words, becoming like a desert. To compensate for this desertification, we use things such as pesticides and fertilizers to add to the strength of our plants, but unfortunately these have not only bad effects on our health, but bad effects on the environment, as they are also major polluters. Additionally, monocropping has led to the mass extinction of known plant species, which I will get back to later. So after seeing the problem, I developed my research question, which is, how can undeveloped countries benefit from the use of aquaponics in their food market? So the reason I chose to focus on undeveloped countries is because I feel they are dealing with the negative effects of agriculture in a much more real way than we are. So as you can see, that first map is a graph of water scarcity. If you can't really see the words, darker areas are more scarce. As you can see, it's very prevalent in Central Africa. Whereas we don't really deal with water scarcity to begin with in the first world. Even if we somehow dealt with the negative effects of it, we would have the adequate medicine and money to deal with things like malnutrition and waterborne diseases, which are common side effects of water scarcity. This is not a reality in these undeveloped countries, making it a much more serious problem there. And additionally, this can have bad effects on the overall safety and economic stability of these countries. Second problem I identified that they're dealing with in a much more real way was pollution. Again, pretty tough to see the graph, but more red areas are more polluted areas. Also very prevalent in Central Africa and Southeast Asia. Roughly 1/4 of man-made greenhouse gases are attributable to agriculture, making it very directly tied in with these people's health. And also, air pollutants are said to be the cause of 1 in 8 premature deaths, which is a very startling statistic to me. And looking at this graph, you can assume where most of those deaths came from. And lastly, since these are the two most overpopulated continents in the world, Africa and Asia, they're dealing with much more serious land constraints than we are. So the first problem I identified was our use of water. This graph here shows the percentage of each country's economy that is made up of agriculture. So darker countries are larger portion of agriculture. As you can see, the largest values are in Africa here. This means that a price change in the market would affect these countries a lot more than it would affect us. Unfortunately, due to the privatization of water in Africa, these price changes have led to a 50% increase of water in the past 5 years. This can have very significant effects for countries that are not in an economic position to deal with this, such as putting people out of business. Maybe a company was able to afford water prices, or maybe is not able to afford them anymore after this increase, or maybe it forces them to downsize to the point where they're actually not making enough profit to be sustainable. So that closes the market a little bit. Additionally, it leads to things such as waterborne diseases, where a family may not be able to afford as much healthy, clean water, or they may be forced to mix water sources, resulting in this unhealthy water, which fills half of the hospital beds in the world. And lastly, it has the ability to decrease the amount of exports that these countries are able to offer. Again, they're paying more for their water, so they may be forced to import either water itself or water-based goods, as opposed to starting that economy locally. Aquaponics do a very good job of tackling this issue by using roughly 1/10 the amount of water as traditional agriculture. While it may seem like there are some downsides to this, they're actually 30% faster at growing the same amount of food. And remember, this is only the same amount of crops, while alongside these crops you are also getting fish. So again, to compare it to traditional agriculture, a lot of water would be used not only for hydrating your livestock, but for hydrating all the plants that they need to consume. So this has the ability to meet a higher demand, not only for a given amount of water, but for a given amount of time, as it actually grows these crops faster. And since it has this additional biomass output, it gives it increased application in areas of malnutrition. Ultimately, I believe that the implementation of aquaponics into undeveloped countries could reduce the amount of waterborne diseases, reduce the prices of water-based goods, as they wouldn't be forced to pay as much for this water, and ultimately de-incentivize water privatization, as there would be less money to be made in this market. So the second problem I identified was our current use of land. Currently, it is estimated that we will need 50% more land by the year 2050 if we are going to continue our agricultural habits. Again, this on its own may not seem very unsettling to you, but this will result in a lot of unconsidered for things, such as deforestation, which is said to be the cause of 24% of man-made carbon and 50% of man-made methane. Oh, I'm sorry, that second part was incorrect. I meant to use that later. Additionally, transporting all of this food results in a lot of unaccounted for pollution. On average, each piece of food travels 1,500 miles from farm to table. So as our population gets a lot bigger, the continued pressure of delivering all this food across the world adds up for a lot of pollution that we are not necessarily easily able to put into numbers. So since these countries are the two most overpopulated, you can see the agricultural values are not necessarily over high in them, but as their populations are projected to grow faster than that of other continents, this land issue is going to get increasingly serious in these two continents. In addition to tackling the water problem in a very efficient way, aquaponics have a very good solution for this land issue. Soilless growing. This allows us with a very, very large amount of possibilities. First, we can grow on rooftops in cities. We can grow up the sides of buildings. If we want to, we can grow on a spaceship on the way to Mars, or even on Mars, given the right environmental conditions, which opens up a world of possibilities. Some countries in China have begun to grow aquaponics up the sides of their buildings, which in my opinion has several positive effects for their society. First, it saves them much needed land, as they are one of the most overpopulated countries in the world. Second, raising the actual elevation that these plants are at does a much better job at soaking up our carbon, as it rises in the atmosphere as we release it. And lastly, oh, I'm sorry, I did forget my third point there. So ultimately, this is adding or helping solve the pollution issue as opposed to adding to it, like our current agricultural model does. This has the ability to stop deforestation. Maybe you could take out land purchases from the current agricultural model. So currently, if I wanted to infiltrate agriculture, I would need enough money to buy acres upon acres of grazing land. But with aquaponics, I could alternatively buy maybe a 10 by 10 piece of land, which would be much cheaper originally, and then build agriculture or infrastructure to work vertically with my agriculture. This is much less limiting than our horizontal constraints. And I believe this would ultimately expand the food market beyond just those who are rich enough to afford these acres upon acres of land. So the third problem that I identified was desertification, was monoculture, which main result is desertification. This is, again, the process of soil losing its ability to healthily house plants. The effects of this are very difficult for us to predict. However, there are some things we know will be entailed in the increased population alongside desertification. First, the increased usage of pesticides and fertilizer, which are known to be great contributors to pollution. Secondly, monocropping has led to the extinction of 93% of known seed varieties since between the years of 1903 and 1983. This statistic was a little bit troubling for us. We kind of didn't believe it at first or thought it may have been misconstrued. But after researching, we found that this was primarily because, say we used to have 10 variety of beets, we grew them all and we found out that the first beet gave us the most amount of food in the least amount of time, and we ditched those 9 others and chose to just grow that one. So ultimately, if we're going to stop this extinction rate of our plant species, it's not going to be because it's economically worth it. It's not going to be because we need to. It's because it's going to be because we chose to as a species and made the right moral decision in that regard. Ultimately, our grazing process will fail us. It is estimated that we will have no more land to grow on in the next century if our desertification rates continue at the exponential rate they are. Aquaponics turn desertification into diversification. This is the process of growing multiple food sources in the same area. They're much easier to move inside, so this has a great benefit for us. It virtually takes weather out of the equation. A lot of the reasons we monocrop in the first place is because certain countries will only allow for the growth of certain crops environmentally. As we can take these things inside, it allows anyone the ability to grow things wherever they want. Also, if we chose to, we could use this technology to preserve all of the plant species that we know are in extreme danger with our agricultural habits. Ultimately, since any agricultural system is stronger once it's diversified, aquaponics promote this behavior. This has the ability to eliminate the use of pesticides and fertilizer, and additionally, the use of these will actually end to the failure of an aquaponic system, so they're also discouraged. And we can also integrate less used plant species into our society for multiple purposes, such as some food deserts may not have good variety of food for their health, and also we're putting these plants into an extinction at a very quick rate. So to readdress the benefits of aquaponics in undeveloped countries, I kind of focus in on 3 main effects. First, since aquaponics are water enclosed, they'll be much more water efficient. This has the ability to decrease waterborne diseases, do things like increase the amount of exports these countries are willing to offer, helping them economically, and de-incentivize water privatization. The second effect that I identified was soilless growing. This gives us the ability to grow vertically, taking out land purchases from the agricultural market and saving overpopulated countries their much needed land, a problem that we don't very directly have to deal with here in the first world. And the last effect I identified was diversification, which has the ability to slow our rate of desertification and deforestation, and ultimately slow our rate of global warming. Aquaponics are an ancient growing method. We identified that they were used by the ancient Chinese, Babylonians, and the Aztecs. Many of the problems that they faced are beginning to arise again today in undeveloped countries. Things such as limited water supply, limited land supply, and feeding the population, having enough resources to meet the demand of the population. Now picture all these problems that I've described to you today, and picture their current severity in Africa. Now picture them as the population is predicted to more than double by the year 2050 in Africa. Now they seem like they might be much more severe in the coming years. Our current agricultural model is not mature enough to fit the needs of our growing population. And if it is ultimately going to be sustainable for us, then it needs to learn to grow up. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. So we're going to open it to questions from our single audience member and our panel. So Bear, feel free to grill him.
All right.
I have a question. So what are, this sounds amazing. What are the barriers to implementation here and the downsides to this?
So this is kind of the unintentional question that we're answering with our action project. It's quite naturally that aquaponics are really hard to set up. We basically put, I'd say, a month and a half and $300 of work into literally getting water to travel in a circular motion by using solar power. So yes, if you put all the things I needed to build an aquaponics system now with my knowledge, I'd simply be able to throw it together in half an hour. But it's actually learning how these systems work. It's just much less easily expandable as far as our comprehension goes than planting something in the ground.
So in third world countries where the educational system is often not particularly effective or good, do you see, what are ways that we could get around those barriers of sort of the knowledge piece and the, right, it's a sophisticated system. How do you effectively get that implemented in a way that they can maintain it themselves?
So one thing I identified, not in my original paper, but as I revised it, is that first of all, this would be much easier with the adoption of a product. This is kind of something we're aiming to do through our project, something that we could give to people that doesn't require full content knowledge of the symbiosis between fish and plants, but just says, put this much fish in, this much plants, buy fish food. Simplifies it a lot. Additionally, I kind of believe that many of the agricultural leaders in the world are educated enough to obtain these systems. The reason they might not be doing it is it might not be so obviously cost effective for them. This is why I highlighted things like the increasing water prices and the increasing population in these areas. One thing I identified for additional research was if we could find a simple money to food conversion for both aquaponics and traditional agriculture, it'd be so much easier for us to make all of our arguments. But yeah, ultimately I believe that it will become worth it if it is not worth it right now.
Maybe a more long-term trajectory rather than short-term.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kyle.
Do you see aquaponics as a way to help potentially with the job market in some of these underdeveloped countries, whereas you could put people to work, and as people growing the crops or people constructing these, how much of a benefit do you think that would be in these underdeveloped countries?
Right, so it's actually super tough to say. One thing that I've noticed through my research is our agricultural portion of our GDP as a planet has gone down. So basically, as we create these systems that expedite the growing process and compartmentalize it, it actually takes a lot less work for us, such as the car market. We can mostly make it machine-based. I can't say, because I don't believe it's true, that it would increase the amount of jobs that are going towards agriculture, but I think that it would bring the economic stability of the average family up to a point through giving them their bare necessities, that they would be in a much better position to increase their job market and their agricultural situation.
You mentioned using aquaponics in space. How would zero gravity affect the growth of plants and fish? Do you know?
I have no reason to believe it wouldn't help it. I know that a super efficient way of growing plants is sideways on wires so that it's not fighting gravity. And you can only do it with certain plants, but you can actually grow them upside down so the gravity helps it. that was really a long-term thing that I put in. I'm not exactly sure. I also
How
know
do fish
another.
swim in zero gravity?
Yeah, that's what I'm
And I don't know-
They're in bubbles of water floating around.
Yeah, we may have to create some artificial gravity. That was far.
Okay. Just wondering.
Other questions? All right.
Nailed it.
Thank you, Max. If you'll step outside for just a moment, please, we will deliberate and call you back.